And I think it's shocking to some of our clients when, of course, they know cost of living is low, but most countries in the world do not have an extreme cost of living where you're having no savings at the end of the month from your paycheck coming in. That's not normal in most countries.
Welcome to the Ideal Investor Show. This is the podcast where we help you challenge your mindset and discover where you are. Let's go. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show, where we have great guests from all over the world, especially today. And so today I want to invite and thank you, Nicole, for being on the show.
Yeah, thank you for having me here, Axel. I'm excited to dive in.
Yeah, absolutely. Very cool. So before we do that, can you spend a few minutes describing what you do and actually how you got to be where you are and do what you do?
Yeah, definitely. So I think with many, it can be a long story, but to kind of condense it. So I'm originally from Canada, and I went through the traditional path, I think, that we're all told. It's changed a little bit in the last few years, but that we are all traditionally told that we're supposed to do, which is get a good education, get a great job in corporate, start getting a mortgage payment and have the 2.5 kids. And so I was on that trajectory. I had the university degree, I had a corporate position in Canada, and I was around 20, 21 years old, so fairly young. And I was like, this is what the rest of my life looks like. It's done. I'm 20 and this is it. Maybe there's a few vacations that are going to be happening in the in between, but this is really what my life is going to look like until I retire. And I was not happy with that trajectory of a life path for myself. So I started looking into how I could change that for myself. It took about a year or two. I ended up moving to China, really not knowing what it was that I wanted to do, but moved to China, had a job there, ended up staying there for 4 years. And in the middle of those 4 years was 2020. So that was definitely an interesting time. But I fell in love with China, and it was actually due to the pandemic when it was during Chinese New Year. So I was locked out of China at the time. I realized that the trajectory of my life, again, was not the direction that I was really wanting it to go. I was working corporate in China, but I was doing the same thing I was in Canada. I was just doing it now in China. So I think for a lot of us, for myself included, 2020 was really a time to think and strategize on the direction and what we actually are passionate about and want to do in our lives. Started a few different businesses, left China, traveled to Turkey, lived in Turkey for about a year, traveled quite a bit of Eastern Europe, which I absolutely love, the Balkan area, and then came here to South America a few years ago. And since then, I started doing it for myself, but we have built out teams in many of the different jurisdictions here in Latin America. I've traveled to most of the countries here, built out teams in some of the lucrative jurisdictions that are here, whether it be for residency, citizenship, banking, whatnot. And so now for the last couple of years, we have helped clients, a lot of Western clients, but clients from all over the globe, to either relocate full-time or to just have a back pocket option, whether it be for their business, if they're looking for banking options, crypto banking options. So really to start diversifying. And it's a trend that, myself as a Canadian, I definitely see in many Canadians, but just in general, in a lot of countries around the globe, I think in the last couple of years, I think it's amazing that people have really understood the importance of diversification and not having your entire life. We talk about those 5 flags, if you're familiar with that theory. There's 9 or 10 different flags now, but really having a diversification of those different flags outside of just 1 or 2 government and countries' baskets.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a pretty amazing story. So, one thing I have to ask, I'm assuming 4 years you got into Mandarin. Is that true?
Yeah, I did speak some Mandarin when I was there. I would have lessons every week. Don't really speak it so much now just because I've been here in Latin America for about the last 3 years. But at the time, you need Mandarin to live in China. There's not too much English.
Yeah, I'm a little jealous because I've always wanted to go to China and never been, but I hope it's still going to happen at some point. Now, one thing I have in my mind kind of like two facets for our discussion conversation to touch on. The one is, and I saw that on your websites, that you're helping people who want to have either a second home or a second location that they can call home or legally go to, like you mentioned, passport and so forth and so forth. And the question that occurred to me when I'm listening, especially lately, to the media in the US and in Europe, is where a lot of those immigrants come from, and in the US oftentimes associated also with illegal immigrants. Very quickly, it sounds like they all come from Middle or South America, which when you say, okay, I'm here and I'm helping people and you can come here and you can invest here and so forth, it feels on first glance a little counterintuitive. Can you touch on that? Like on the one hand, people in large numbers wanting to leave. And then on the other hand, you're saying, yeah, but there's the other side of that coin. Can you illuminate that a little bit?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. And of course, with the media anywhere in the world, they want you to see one side of things, but there's always multiple sides of things that you sometimes have to go looking for. And it's true, there are great opportunities in Canada and the US, and it is a serious decision to potentially leave that system, as I have, especially for banking, for loans and mortgages. Like that is a very serious decision. Healthcare, depending on where you're from as well. So that is a serious issue because a lot of these countries do have great infrastructure that a lot of immigrants are looking to get into. But we don't help, I'm sure there's lots of immigration agencies who are helping the maybe like Nicaraguans and Colombians who are looking to legally apply to get into the US. We don't do that. We do the opposite, which is what I have personally done. And like I said, there really is a growing community of individuals, whether it's corporate, whether they're in DeFi or crypto, from all walks of life, families. We work with a lot of families as well, individuals, couples who are looking just for diversification options. Because one example that I really like to use that hits close to home, but also I think illustrates it well, is the trucker protest in 2020. So
Right.
that happened in Canada. A lot of them were not wanting to get vaccinated, which is their prerogative. And so if you were donating to them, to the truckers who were a part of this protest, and your bank accounts were frozen. And so we see, that's just one example of many, but we see many different, almost micro incidents of how Western governments are becoming more restrictive. The EU as well, Canada, Australia, most definitely, the US. And they're always just coming up with incorporating new laws to make you either stay or higher exit tax or more difficult to leave, or CFC rules and PE rules when it comes to corporations. So they're making it a lot more difficult to leave. Now, that being said, there's a whole strategy and planning going behind leaving, whether it's yourself personally or corporate. And it's not just, a one call and we figure it all out on one call. There's options, depends where your business is. But there are different stages. You can either kind of do what I did and just full on leave, or you can start working your way toward having various different residencies, or maybe working your way toward a citizenship through an investment, or getting residency expecting to naturalize and live there down the line in the future. So you don't have to leave quite yet, but you're setting yourself up to have options if you're wanting to leave, if an incident or a law is passed in the future that you don't like. You have that other option to leave. And what we always say at Worldwise Capital, our firm, is that the options that are available now are not necessarily always going to be options that are going to be on the table forever. I mean, there was just one option in Mexico just a few days ago that got taken off the table. So you really want to make sure, if you qualify now, and if this is something that you're interested in and you are thinking, maybe, it's a maybe, it's not a yes, but it's a maybe down the line, relocation or just having a back pocket plan B residence could be for you for potential relocation, then get in on those options now. But yeah, I mean, to answer your question, really, we really work with Westerners because that's myself, and that is what we are familiar with. And getting into these jurisdictions that are a little bit more interesting for them and that they are no longer inside of a government of a Western system or an EU system. And a lot of the government systems and the way that the countries work down here in South America, it's civil law system. It's very different. Obviously, there's a lot culturally to get accustomed to and the language, but it is a very different way of life. And you're paying potentially little to no tax along with that as well.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for describing that. I mean, one of the examples that comes to my mind, my family, when I was relatively young, we always used to go to a vacation in Italy or Austria or Spain or so forth. And I know that people from all over Europe used to do this, no problem. And then, people even bought condos and what have you. And then suddenly, and to quite a lot of people's surprise, the Brits decided to want to do Brexit. And I don't think how many of those who actually voted with a completely different focus, like as if, like here's the music on one end and here's the focus, made their decision for or against, and then suddenly found out, oh, now I can't go to Spain anytime I want, or to Italy or to Greece anymore. Oh, I can't easily buy a property anymore. So your point about if you currently have the opportunity because the circumstances are aligned properly, I would say that's definitely a good point. Now, the other thing I wanted to touch on, and I'm kind of just making a very uneducated guess because I have you, since, like then I don't have to know myself, that there's, I think the US alone has like 10,000 people retiring every week or every day or something like that out of my generation. And one of the things that is obviously a question is, where can I get relative quality of life for the income that I have? Whether it's money that you put aside yourself, whether it's money that you put aside through your 401k plan, whether it's money that is sitting in a house that you bought 30 years or 40 years ago, or any of those kind of things. When it comes to, okay, how much purchasing power do I actually have with the money that comes in when I'm not working anymore? And what kind of lifestyle can I afford with that? Can you touch a little bit on the differences and what you see with your clients?
Yeah, definitely. So I always like to say, when it comes to costs and cost of living, there are a few countries, I'm from one, probably most of the listeners are from one, where it's a high cost of living and that is only increasing every year. A lot of countries don't, and I think it's shocking to some of our clients when, of course, they know cost of living is low, but most countries in the world do not have an extreme cost of living where you're having no savings at the end of the month from your paycheck coming in. That's not normal in most countries. If you're making a local wage, yes, but if you're making, you're running your business or you're making money online somehow and you're living in one of these countries, like it's very normal to have a good amount of savings at the end of the month. So I think that is somewhat of a perspective shift for those who are Westerners who have always lived in a Western country, and that just is kind of the norm. So if we're looking specific at Latin America, I mean, we couple cost of living and how much you're making per month, but we also going along with that is also lifestyle. So there's a lot of different lifestyles. Cost of living comes into play, but also just what you are looking to do in your life and the potential facilities, healthcare that you're looking to have. So some countries in South America are going to be better than others. If we're looking at the lower end, where probably to live a good, comfortable life where you are, having a good, usually private healthcare and having relatively good infrastructure. On the lower end, you're probably looking at a minimum of 3,000 US per month in Latin America, going to maybe 4,500. And then I would say maybe that's like middle to lower, but it's very dependent on lifestyle. So it's hard to give exact numbers. And some countries for that would be Colombia is a great option. Paraguay is a great option. Peru, I absolutely love Peru. The food is incredible. The people are amazing. But again, it also depends where you are choosing to live. Myself and essentially all of our clients, probably the listeners, are wanting to live in some of the nicer buildings, the nicer areas where most of the expats are staying. You're not staying, in like a local barrio with the locals, for example. And so in that, yes, cost of living will be a little bit higher, but it's still relatively affordable. If you're looking for I mean, Argentina is an interesting one for a lot of our clients because Buenos Aires, Patagonia, it has everything you could want in terms of nature, but the cost of living is a little bit higher. I was there about a year and a half, 2 years ago, right before the election, so about 2 years ago. And the cost of living has increased significantly. But again, it's a trade off of if that is a country that you are drawn to and a lifestyle that you're wanting and the ability to travel and live in Buenos Aires, then that cost of living is going to be something that you're okay with, kind of the trade-off there. So that can be a little bit more, I would say probably 4,000 to 5,000 per month, where you can live in a great area, go for morning coffee every day and have meals out and not really cook so much and just live a good quality of life. So I would say that would probably be on the higher end. Brazil as well, depending on where you are. If you're in the south, the beaches in Florianopolis, that would probably be similar to Buenos Aires. But I mean, these countries, it's tricky to say because Brazil is a huge country. Argentina is a huge country. Like there's so many places. But I guess we're really talking about living in the capital city. So I would say anywhere
either
from
that, capital city or like a nice location with the beach or something like with amenities and stuff like that. Now, are those numbers that you mentioned as like kind of a little bit for an idea, are those for couples or is that for single or what would you say?
Yeah, so for couples, for a family, obviously you're probably looking for a 3 or 4 bedroom apartment or maybe a home rental, but those prices are for a 1 or 2 bedroom, again, depending on the area, but a 1 or 2 bedroom for 2 people living good quality of life, going out, maybe going to the cinema, going bowling,
Yeah.
going out to nice restaurants, like just living a good quality of life.
Okay, very cool. Now then, you said, I think when you and I first talked the very first time, I saw something that you also considered yourself a digital nomad, which is probably on the other end of like here you have somebody who has a 401k ready to retire, doesn't necessarily want to stay in the rat race as much, get out, live a little bit higher quality of life, maybe in a nicer location that would be excruciatingly expensive. Like, I mean, we are in San Diego, anything, if you don't have basically 6 figures, you can forget it, right? Like it's basically not doable. So but the other end for the digital nomad, how is that? I'm always hoping we also have some younger listeners.
So digital nomad is such an arbitrary term. I feel like everyone has a different definition of it. I traveled and I mean, we have an apartment right now, but I still technically live out of a suitcase. I'm very much so a minimalist. That's how I like it. But I traveled a digital nomad lifestyle for about 3 years, living just out of one suitcase. And I will say, I mean, there's obviously lifestyle aspects that are difficult, but the one thing that I found that a lot, I would say probably about 30 to 50% more you can expect to pay is on Airbnb costs. In Europe, in Latin America, the Airbnb, you're paying that additional surcharge for a nice place, has good amenities, it has the plates, the cups, all the things that you need to just kind of go there and live. You don't have to purchase anything. So I will say for digital nomads, that is one additional expense where I would probably add on. I mean, it depends, but I'd probably add on like 30 to 40% just for Airbnbs versus if you're just renting from the local market, even a furnished rental is a little bit more, but it's still going to be a lot more affordable than staying at Airbnbs. But if you're living a nomadic lifestyle, then that is, that's kind of part of it. Like 1 or 2 months, you can't really get a lease. Usually most leases here in Latin America, you can find 6 months, but usually they're 12-month leases. So that can be a little bit tricky. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, that answers part of the question, and I think that is an important aspect. The other part that I wanted to touch on or basically dig into a little bit more, and I know this because I'm originally from Europe, and I just mentioned the Brexit thing, but it's for anybody who is not European, and I know this is fundamentally anywhere in the world. Digital nomad, I use that not so much because it has a consistent definition, but it's basically you are in a location, you're not really a resident, you're not really owning anything, but you're basically generating income through your online work, in most cases at least. And so from what I know from several places is that you may or may not need a certain visa. You may or may not have certain limitations. You know, you may only be 90 days, or you may be able to extend it to half a year. You know, like I know some people, whether they're digital nomads or not, they constantly talk about in their YouTube videos, okay, in and out of the Schengen area, which is kind of like the free trade area within the European Union, and which countries are part of it and which are not. You know, so Albania, for example, became an interesting place because it's not part of the Schengen area, even though it's like literally right at the Mediterranean. So you can be in Italy and then you drive a little and you're in Albania or in Montenegro or something. And so you're in and out, and the point is, and you're the expert, the point is more that aspect of how long can you be where, and what kind of things do you need to do from a like preparation perspective. Can you touch a little bit on that? Because I think too many people think, oh, all I need is an internet connection and a laptop and I'm good to go. And I think that's a little short-sighted. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. So I have a little bit of a qualm with the term digital nomad visa, quite honestly. Depending on your citizenship or the citizenships you hold and where you're from, you will likely have to some countries, you know, if you're holding a Western passport, a lot of the countries in Latin America and in Europe, you're going to be able to stay for 3 or 6 months, depending on the country, typically, and you don't need any sort of visa. It is a tourist visa, but you're not going to the embassy and getting an application done. It's just essentially like an automatic tourist visa with your passport. Obviously, now the EU, it's a little bit different. There's another step, but for the most part, it's very straightforward. Now, digital nomad visa, I think, gets a little bit of a wrong rap just because I think a lot of people get confused of, okay, well, I can stay there for 3 or 6 months. So why do I need a digital nomad visa? I like to use, instead of the term digital nomad visa, I like to use the term more of a longer term stay visa. So digital nomad can be where you're living somewhere every 1 month, every 3 months, every 6 months, or it can be more of a expat visa, quite honestly, where
Right,
this
right.
is you're staying in and this is where I'm living. So, you know, Spain or Portugal or Colombia or Uruguay, a lot of countries. I believe there's over 60 different countries now that offer digital nomad visas. Some of them have different income requirements and documents that needed, but it's more of a long-term stay expat visa. So if you're really honing in on one country and looking to stay in that one country, then a nomad visa makes sense. If you're looking to test out a few different countries and you have visa-free travel access already with your citizenship and your passport, then I would say do that, hop around, figure out where you like, and then you can potentially apply for the digital nomad visa. Depending on the caveat I like to give is depending on what your longer term plan looks like. So if you're just planning to live there for a year or 2 years and then go somewhere else, perfect. Nomad visa is probably going to work for you because you have the right to live there longer term. If you're looking to get residency there, or maybe you really love this country and you want to work your way towards citizenship by naturalization, some digital nomad visas will allow you to transition over to a different visa or to work your way towards citizenship, but a lot of them don't. So you really want to, and that's why some of these countries here in Latin America, they do have nomad visas. But if you're just looking for a backup residency option, the nomad visa isn't going to make sense because it gives you a right to live there, but it doesn't give you an indefinite residency or a pathway towards citizenship if that's what you're wanting. So depending on the jurisdiction, Uruguay, I'll give as an example, is a great one because they have a nomad visa, but they're also one of the very few countries who give you access to immediate permanent residence. Yes, it does take some time to get, but there's no temporary residence in that process. So you can go immediately to PR in less than a year, and the requirements to keep that active are very low in terms of the physical requirements to be on the ground to keep the residency active. So if you're looking for a diversification option or just an option where maybe in 3 or 5 or 10 years you may want to live there, don't get the nomad visa, get the residency. Yes, there's some additional documentation required and tests and exams, but get that residency and then you hold that indefinitely as long as you're fulfilling the requirements that it requires to keep it active.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason I basically asked and make a little bit of the distinction, I've always seen it as basically if you go as a tourist, the expectation is you're enjoying the area, you're spending some of your money in the local economy, but you're not making money, right? And in a way, I've always felt digital nomad is kind of like one level below a real work permit. Like when you work for a corporation and they have some operation in another country and they send you there, especially if it's like a year or 2 or 3 or something like that, that would be a real true work permit, not necessarily residency or only temporary. But a nomad is more like, okay, it's not quite tourist, but it's working and you're making money and there's taxation potentially attached to it and so forth. So I've always separated it that way. And then I totally agree. And for anybody in the audience, this is why actually it's called Ideal Wealth Grower. The G for grower stands for your goals, right? So, and I'm sure you do the same, Nicole, to first say, okay, well, let's talk about what are really your goals. Are you just trying to diversify? You want to have options, you call it back pocket passport or locations to go. Okay, that's one set of goals. If you really want to spend significant amount of time in the next 20 years in another country, that's a different set of goals. Which brings me to the next question, because oftentimes in the less traditional, let's call it, countries where people sometimes have associations that are not really current anymore. Like I always say, when I was little, supposedly there were all little yellow men running around in China. And when I see the YouTube videos, not only are they not little yellow men, but they're more sophisticated than most Western countries these days. So these like old preconceptions are definitely wrong. But what I was getting at is with this goal setting, and our audience being quite a bit focused on investing and real estate and so forth, can you say a little bit, like not obviously for all 60 countries that you might be serving, but like if somebody were to say, okay, I like what Nicole says about some South American options, let's stay maybe within that. How would that be? Can anybody like purchase real estate? Do you have to pay cash, or what are typically the circumstances?
Yeah, definitely. So there are quite a few residency options in South America where you can purchase real estate. Now, I will say, usually purchasing a property, it's usually property or starting a business with a certain amount of capital in that country are not the only ways to go. There usually are other options. But if a property purchase in a jurisdiction in order to obtain residency, and this is residency, not citizenship, I will make that
Right.
differentiation. You still have to live in that country and work your way toward citizenship. There are various jurisdictions where that's interesting. So a lot of Canadians, Americans, first one I'm going to mention is Costa Rica. So Costa Rica actually used to be 200,000 and now it's at 150 US, which we rarely see prices go down. Not forever, but it's
Yeah.
currently at 150 for a couple. So
Special.
if you're looking to purchase a property, I will say it depends on the area that you're looking to purchase in Costa Rica. You're probably going to be spending more than 150, especially if you're in Tamarindo or some of these very beautiful up and coming areas or there's a lot of gated communities as well. So foreigners kind of like that aspect and the safety aspect, and it's a lot of foreigners who are in these communities. So that's one option. Another option, I mean, Brazil is slightly less interesting right now, but there are some interesting opportunities in the north of Brazil where investment is lower. Investment is around 100,000 if you're looking to purchase a property, get residency, and then in 4 years' time, you can work your way toward the citizenship. In the south, it's closer to 200,000, all numbers in USD. What else? Uruguay, for tax purposes, a property can be interesting if you are looking to relocate and then take advantage of their tax scheme and not live in Uruguay full time, but just to full out purchase a property for residency. That's not an option in Uruguay, and that's not the way you want to go, especially because there's much easier ways to get residency in Uruguay. Colombia is also an interesting one. I personally, just from a lifestyle perspective, do not like Colombia. I not great country, great food, nice people, but not one of the countries where I want to spend time in. But a lot of foreigners do like that. So there is the option to work your way towards citizenship through purchasing a property. And then another one that we see a lot of interest in, especially because it's a dollarized economy, is in Panama. So
Right.
it can either be 200,000 or 300,000. 300, you go immediately to PR. Again, depending on where you're purchasing, it's the property, even just a condo in the city, is probably going to be 300,000 plus. But then with that, there's a 10,000 donation to the government for the PR through that golden visa option. So there's a few different routes, but like I said, and like you mentioned, we always start, the first question we always ask clients is, what's the medium to long-term plan? Like, what are we working with
Right.
here, whether family or yourself? Like, what does this plan look like? Do you have businesses? Because like I said, instead of purchasing a property, you could also start a business in some of these countries. Yes, there's more a lot of the time, sometimes not the case, but a lot of the time there's more than just starting a business and hiring yourself. You have to have a true operation, but there are free zones that you can also take advantage of. So depends on your lifestyle and what you're looking to build. But I would say in terms of specifically property investment, those are some of the more interesting options. Um, Now, if you're wanting to get, loans or anything like that, you would already have to hold residency in that jurisdiction in order to take advantage of their financial system. So this is where it becomes tricky. I mean, with Americans, it's pretty straightforward because most of them are not leaving the US or planning to leave the US before this happens. But with Canadians, sometimes you've already left the system, and then it can be more difficult to get banking options as a non-resident if you're looking to get access to loans and whatnot. So typically, we we can assist privately with loans depending on the jurisdictions. My team's on the ground, but if you're looking from public institutions in that country, I wouldn't look to them. If you're wanting to get a loan, you have to have typically the cash to pay up front, or if you're looking for a property investment to get residency, let's say in Panama, for example, you have to have the initial capital to qualify, so that 200,000 or 300,000, and then you can have a loan or payment plans, whatever that may look like, privately, publicly, elsewhere. But you have to have that initial capital to qualify for the residency.
Yeah, that makes sense. And so for our audience, what you can see is if your goal is not necessarily to have a residency, but you want to have a place, which, that the one doesn't automatically require, in my experience, the other, that's an option. The other thing is also, it depends. And again, you're the expert, Nicole, but I've tapped into it a little bit for my own investments and for some of our clients. It's also a matter of the approach, right? Like, because a lot of countries are interested for people with expertise to come in and start businesses. And I've seen in certain locations, it's easier if you go in and say, okay, I want to form a company here, and you create the company, then you fund the company with some money. It doesn't have to be like hundreds of thousands, but with some money, start whatever kind of operation. So almost a little bit of a variation on the digital nomad kind of thing. And then to say, okay, so now for my company and for potentially having people, provide housing and stuff like that, I want to buy a property, so that the business is the one that is buying property, and the business is already established. The business has a business bank account and those kind of things. And I by no means want to make it sound like it's the same thing, like walking into Bank of America and opening a business bank account. It's not the same. But that route has, for some of our clients, been a little bit the more easy path, because there's not the immediate connection to residency. It was more, okay, I want to build a business. I want to have ownership of, like, a building that my employees can use, and I use it for some time when I'm there and stuff like that. And I want financing for it. It's more like a business loan kind of situation, rather than, okay, I want to live, I want residency, I want a passport, all those kind of things. So would you agree that that is one path that is possible?
Yeah, that's definitely one path. So, like I mentioned, in terms of investment, it's usually either property or land or starting a business.
Right.
And in most cases, the business capital is going to be less. I would say 50% less, sometimes even more. But there is some capital that you have to have in the business and local employees and really have everything set up on the ground. And that usually works better for certain tax optimized jurisdictions rather than, I mean, it depends where your customers are and where you're looking to have operations, but usually we will structure those in certain jurisdictions over others.
Yeah, exactly. And that brings us back to the point we made a little bit ago, is first, let's find out what do you want to accomplish, right? And then when you have basically got clarity about that, then what is the right place? What are the right circumstances? What are the rules and stuff? So I only know enough to be dangerous. And if I were to actually do any of this, I would come to you, Nicole, obviously, as the expert. If others want to do the same, they want to come to you and say, this sounds intriguing. I'm not totally sure exactly what I want to do, but I know it feels safer, like with everything, if you have a plan B or an alternative. So what would they have to do if they wanted to get in touch?
Yeah, so just head to our website. We have lots of info on there and all the different countries, jurisdictions, services that we offer. And I mean, I think it can be slightly intimidating when you are going into this space and you're not really sure what you're wanting and honestly what you're needing. So that's why we kind of start with the approach of what does the goal look like for yourself, for your family, for your business, for yourself personally, and where are you wanting to live and potentially start to build ties. A lot of our clients can get overwhelmed if we just throw everything at them. So we'll usually have an initial consult, get the information, and then get the information from the client of what it is they're looking for and structure. And usually they have some sort of idea, whether it's Europe or Europe, usually more so for citizenship if they're looking for that option, or Latin America for various different reasons, and then work backward from there. But I mean, it can even start as simply as getting a bank account, a personal bank account in another jurisdiction. And then you have a bank account. Yes, if you're American, there are some filing requirements, but if you're Canadian or European, there is a bank account that you now have and you can put a little bit of money there. And so that is even a good way. Or, a simple, straightforward residency process. All residency processes, you do have to be on the ground to get them started. There's biometrics, but it can be, one day on the ground, 5 business days on the ground. And to kind of start simply, a lot of our clients like to do, and then they work their way up from there and maybe start relocating their business and start structuring different incentives for taxes in certain jurisdictions. And then we kind of ramp it up from there.
Yeah, and all that makes sense. I think there's also this other component to say, yeah, I can see the benefits, but I don't really know yet what's possible. And so you could really educate them. Right, great. Well, Nicole, I want to thank you for your time, for your expertise, and for making yourself available. And if we have anybody has any questions, you can contact me and I make the connection. And we're going to put all the links and stuff in the show notes so people can find, how do I get a hold of Nicole? I want to have a plan B and a back pocket and maybe a place and all the good stuff. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.